when we met here 12 months ago to remember those who died in armed conflict and as a result of terrorism, it would have been hard to imagine that today we would be experiencing yet again a major war in Europe, resulting in the deaths of tens of thousands of combatants, with an estimated 8 million people having been displaced, most fleeing Ukraine as refugees. And, of course, the economic effects that have been felt throughout Europe and beyond. Against these horrendous facts, we hear the ghosts of 2 world wars crying out, "Never again, never again." And this morning, we heard the words of 2 First World War poets, the parable of the old man and the young by Wilfred Owen, and Dreams by Sassoon, conveying the horrors of war and hoping beyond the odds that major conflicts would be consigned to history. Briefly this morning, I would like to look at the lives and the legacy of the soldier poets Wilfred Owen and Sassoon. Human nature is such that despite the brutality of war, it is often unavoidable. An evil necessary to defend liberty and democracy, to protect the weak and preserve freedom, to redress the inequality and injustice. And the men whose names we read out this morning gave their lives, in Bunyan's words, so that we that are left grow old. And greater love hath no man than this, than he lay down his life for his friends. But the poets of the Great War wanted to dispel the romanticized themes and language of the Victorian poets with a style that had no frills and was immediate. So what once had been celebrated as a courageous military feat in a poem like Tennyson's Charge of the Light Brigade was now transformed into a new message. War is merciless. Death is futile. And nothing illustrates this better than Wilfred Owen's poem Dulce et decorum est, in which he describes a soldier drowning from a gas attack. In all my dreams, before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. And he concludes the poem after a harrowing description of his death. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which translates as, what a sweet and honourable thing it is to die for your country. Sweet it was not. Owen wanted soldiers to know, back in England, that they had no idea what they were letting themselves in for, and essentially accuses the government of deceit. And in the poem, The Parable of the Old Man and the Young, which was read earlier, he shows the willingness of the old to sacrifice the young. And like so much of Owen's poetry, the sting is in the tale. In the last lines of the poem, he adds his own twist to Genesis 22. Behold, a ram caught in a thicket by its horns. Offer the ram of pride instead of him. But the old man would not so, but slew his son, and half the seed of Europe, one by one. Owen's ironic rewriting of the poem reminds us how things really are. Religious optimism is crucified on the cross of human history. Brought up by a devoutly evangelical mother, Wilfred Owen had thought at one time of becoming an Anglican priest, and had even served for a few years as a lay assistant. But before the war, his evangelical faith had collapsed. Nevertheless, in his poetry, religious images are inescapable, for he often juxtaposes his experience with the widely accepted Christian view. The war made him aware that, as he saw it, the collapse of Christian values. In a letter to his mother, he wrote, "I am more and more Christian as I walk the unchristian ways of Christendom. Already I have comprehended a light which never will filter into the dogma of any national church, namely that of one of Christ's essential commands. Be bullied, be outraged, be killed, but do not kill." It may be unrealistic, but there it is, and pulpit professionals are ignoring it very skillfully and successfully indeed. Christ is literally in no man's land. Thus you see how pure Christianity will not fit in with pure patriotism. Owen's placing of Christ in no man's land is an interesting one because it echoes a passage from Henry Barbusse's novel Under Fire, written in 1917, in which he describes a pilot on a Sunday morning reconnaissance flight at the front who observes two religious services taking place simultaneously, one on the British side and one on the German side. One of the services, whichever you like, was a reflection of the other. The padre on the British side, parodied in the musical of Oh, What a Lovely War, was praying that God would look kindly on the imminent attack on Arras. And no doubt a similar request was being made on the German side. What the pilot thought, would God think about it all? In the event, the British suffered 160,000 casualties, the Germans 125,000, and it was a costly stalemate with no strategic gain. God was indeed on no man's land. Christianity ideally represented the reality, or even the absurdity of wartime experience that was at the centre of much of the war poetry. In particular, the role that Christian leaders and their flocks played in the sanctification of the war, in giving it moral approval. Owen enlisted in October 1915, and in June 1916 he was commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Manchester Regiment. He was sent up to the line to death twice. After the first time, when he was blown high into the air and suffered severe concussion, he was sent to Craiglockert War Hospital near Edinburgh. It was here that he met fellow poet Siegfried Sassoon. Owen was considerably influenced by Sassoon, and it was due to him that he persevered in his ambition to write better poetry. Sassoon came from a very different background than Owen. His father was Jewish and his mother Anglo-Catholic. He had been to Marlborough College and then on to Clare College, Cambridge, and with a small private income was able to live modestly without having to earn a living. Motivated by patriotism, he joined the army and became a second lieutenant in the Welsh Fusiliers. In the month he was sent to France, his younger brother died at Gallipoli. In France, he met the poet Robert Graves. They were both in the same regiment, and they became close friends. Graves' view of gritty realism changed Sassoon's concept of what poetry should be, And so, like Owen, his poetry changed to show the ugly truth of the trenches. Earlier we heard his poem Dreamers, which contrasts the realities of war with the soldiers longing for home and domestic comfort and security. Much of Sassoon's poetry showed a certain cynicism in its style, which was very effective, as with his poem, Does It Matter? Does it matter losing your legs? For people will always be kind, and you need not show that you mind when others come in after hunting to gobble their muffins and eggs. Does it matter losing your sight? There's such splendid work for the blind, and people will always be kind as you sit on the terrace remembering and turning your face to the light. Do they matter, those dreams from the pit? You can drink and forget and be glad, and people won't say that you're mad, for they'll know that you fought for your country, and no one will worry a bit. And in his poem, They, he took not a dissimilar view to Owen in lampooning the church. The bishop tells me, when the boys come back, they will not be the same, for they'll have fought in a just cause. They led the last attack on Antichrist. Their comrades' blood has bought new right to breed an honourable race. They have challenged death and dared him face to face. We're none of us the same, the boys reply, for George has lost both legs and Bill's stone blind. Poor Jim's shot through the lungs and like to die, and Bert's gone syphilitic. You'll not find a chap who's served that hasn't found some change. And the bishop said, the ways of God are strange. Sassoon's periods of duty on the Western Front were marked by exceptional brave actions. He single-handedly captured a German trench, armed with grenades, and scattered over 50 German soldiers. He was subsequently awarded the Military Cross. In 1917, after a period of convalescent leave, Sassoon decided to make a stand against the conduct of the war. A letter which he sent to his commanding officer, titled A Soldier's Declaration, was forwarded to the press and then read out in Parliament by a sympathetic MP. The letter was seen by some as treasonous. He wrote, I believe that the war upon which I entered as a war of defence and liberation has now become a war of aggression and conflict. His friend Robert Graves saved him from a court-martial by convincing the review board that he was suffering from shell shock, and he was sent to Craiglockhart, where he met Owen. The Great War, to many historians, marked the beginning of the modern world. The replacement of horses with tanks, the compassionate recognition of conditions such as shell shock, while at the same time the army executed deserters. The use of radio communications and the beginning of aerial photography. The century had begun with such great optimism. Modern technology would at last be able to allow humanity to master science and serve the end of human happiness. Science, knowledge, and increasing wisdom, according to Robert Mackenzie, an historian of the late 19th century, would advance mankind to a higher platform of intelligence and well-being. Instead, there was the systematic and pointless slaughter of humanity. 58,000 casualties on the first day of the Somme. Modern science, which had promised so much, made possible weapons of unprecedented destructiveness. It was the poetry of the Great War, above all else, that underlined the brutal realities and futility of it all. Sassoon survived the war. He returned to the front in 1918. And towards the end of his life, he converted to Roman Catholicism. He died in 1967. Wilfred Owen returned to the front line in 1918. 1 week before the end of the war, he was shot and killed. The news of his death arrived at his parents' home on Armistice Day, as the church bells were ringing out in celebration. He was posthumously awarded the Military Cross for gallantry. Strangely, it was an award he'd always sought in order to justify himself as a real war poet. I'll finish by reading the last stanza of a poem written by another poet, the novelist Thomas Hardy, who wrote this to commemorate the signing of the armistice on the 11th of November 1918. It's called "And There Was a Great Calm." Calm fell. From heaven distilled a clemency. There was peace on earth and silence in the sky. Some could not shake off misery. The sinister spirit sneered. It had to be. And again, the spirit of pity whispered, why? Amen.